"So, who you say is the suspect?" I asked, unable to believe my ears that it was finally happening. "How many times need I say? It's Nellie. Goodness, you should get your ears checked." Old Mrs. Murphy genuinely seemed concerned, for I had already asked her to say the name out loud 4 times. It almost felt like a dream, though I couldn't show it in front of the old woman. I truly wanted to smile and laugh to my heart's content. Too bad that I couldn't show my true emotions and had to fake a concerned expression. "Nellie, the girl I have only watched from a distance at Edna's coffee shop for a long time. She used to stare at me with disdain, but look at her now. So pathetic," as I watched her distressed face trying to explain to the other employees that she was innocent. I couldn't help getting filled with joy, so much so that I was barely able to hold the deadpan expression. The first day I saw her, I was but a 12-year-old child. Her vulgar legs were wrapped around my father's waist as she jumped on him. Trust me, I'd never been so disgusted in my life. My father, who seemed to be doing a little too well after my mother's death, was becoming an eyesore to be, and that was the day when I found out why he was behaving that way. The coffee shop that my mother used to run with such care and warmth was given as a gift to that vile woman. Even the thought of that day makes me want to puke my guts out. A few months before my mom's death, I started to notice bruises on her body, which she always tried her best to cover. Whenever she looked at me, she would give me a bright smile. Back then, I only felt happy because of that, but now that I'm trying to picture her smiling face, all I can remember is her weary eyes and her weak state. When they were taking away Mom, and everyone was talking about how she jumped out the window to unalive herself, all I could see was the expression on her face that was of sheer terror. I still don't understand how no one else could tell that there had to be another explanation behind it. The way Dad was trying to force his tears out was so visible, but I couldn't understand how others were buying his fake sadness and sympathizing with him. When he gifted the cafe to that wretched woman, I wanted to scream and tell him that I knew that he was the one who did something to my mom, but I knew if I did that, he would get rid of me without hesitation. After thinking about it for so long, I realized that if my dad wanted to do anything on his own, he would have done so long ago. It wasn't like he ever tried to hide his affair from Mom. Was he after her cafe? If so, then why give it to his mistress? That was when it hit me. He wasn't the one who did it. It was probably that wench. Since the realization, I started watching her from afar, watching how she tainted my mom's beloved cafe and treated it like her own. The way she walked around with her nose held high made me want to strangle her that instant. As time passed, I grew anxious and couldn't wait for my revenge. I had to do something for her to confess her crimes, but I didn't know what to do. Then one day, the opportunity presented itself when she walked into my room in Dad's absence. Initially, I was surprised and disgusted when I got out of the shower and saw her looking at me lustfully. But when she told me about her misunderstanding about how she noticed me watching her and why she thought it was, it gave me an idea. I told her what she was thinking was right, but I was afraid of Dad finding out. That's why I didn't reveal my intention to her. She walked closer and placed her repulsive lips on me by saying he wasn't coming home tonight, so he wouldn't find out. I grabbed drinks from the refrigerator and started drinking with her while pretending to be happy that I finally got her, when in reality I was disgusted by her. Just when she was drunk enough, she started babbling about how Dad was the only one who pushed my mom off the bedroom window. She also told me it was she who egged him to do it. I was so furious that I started choking her, but that was when the door swung open and Dad entered. When he saw me with that woman, he got angry and lunged at me. But before he could do anything, I grabbed a knife and stabbed him. As he struggled on the floor, I went to the kitchen, cleaned the knife, and then put it on the drunk Nellie's hand. Then, with the knife in her hand, I stabbed his chest multiple times until he finally died. I retreated to my bedroom, and around 2 in the morning, I called the police and pretended to have just woken up and saw that in the living room. I began crying as I told them how heartbroken I was, that first my mom died and now my father was killed. Of course, pretending to be scared of the killer, who was also part of my plan. The police showed up, but since Nellie was dead drunk, they didn't suspect her. They were clever and observing enough to tell that someone tried to frame her, and it truly frightened me that she might get away. A few months later, when the police couldn't find any other possible suspect, and luckily I was also ruled out from the suspect list, they began focusing on Nellie. I had just received the good news from an old worker of my mom's cafe, and trust me, I was over the moon. All I wish is that she gets arrested smoothly and without any further drawbacks.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Back when I was in college, I used to work evening shifts at an independent coffee shop that happened to be right next door to this little bagel place. I think there must have been some degree of collusion between the two owners, as the bagel place was geared to be like a health nut place, whereas all the baked goods the coffee shop produced had like diabetes-inducing levels of sugar in them. So naturally, I'd often gone to the bagel place to grab a bite to eat before clocking in for my shift. Since the sugar craft that followed, one of the cinnamon buns was about as debilitating as they come. But that's how I met Tom. Tom worked full-time at the bagel place, and he was there to take my order like 9 out of 10 times that I stopped by. It wasn't long before he knew my order off by heart. Shortly after that, we were on first-name terms, and the more familiar we got, the more little gentle flirting entered into our daily exchanges. Wasn't mad about it? He was kind of cute, and it certainly didn't sting that he started giving me discounts. After a month or so, he asked me if I have a boyfriend. I said no. So he asked me if I'd like to grab a drink or something after our shift ends. The bagel place and the coffee shop closed within a half an hour of each other. I said sure, because why not, right? But oh my god, if I'd have known that kind of guy Tom was and have just resigned myself to getting fat from the danishes at work, a few extra pounds would be easy to shake. But a full-blown stalker, not so much. Okay, so I didn't meet Tom after work that day, as I was too busy with an upcoming deadline. However, we did arrange to meet over the weekend, so we could see if we click. It definitely wasn't the greatest date I'd ever been on. Like, I don't think whatever chemistry we had really translated into a social conversational setting. But I didn't write them off altogether, and we agreed to go out next time we were both free. It's so weird to think he actually gave me space at first, like we went 48 hours at a time without talking sometimes. It really did seem chill. But then came the day when I walked into the bagel place and the manager was working the evening shift. This is highly out of the ordinary, so I asked her if Tom was sick or something. It's then she hits me with Tom isn't employed here anymore. We decided it was best that we parted ways. I'm shocked. So while I'm waiting for my order, I text Tom to ask him what the heck happened with his parting ways business. He replies pretty quickly, telling me that the manager had caught him giving me a discount and fired him as a result. Immediately, I felt terribly guilty, and I get the idea that if I pay off the difference from what was owed, I could maybe talk her into giving him his old job back. So right when I collected my bagel, I politely offered to pay back the discount if she considered offering Thomas's job back. I kind of embellished a little, making out that I'm the one who manipulated him into doing it, and the whole time the manager has this wow expression on her face. I think I'm making a solid point. She comes back with, "Oh, is that what he told you?" According to her, Tom hadn't been fired for giving discounts. It was her own policy that employees of local businesses get money off their food. He'd been fired because she'd received a number of complaints from female customers regarding his behavior towards them. His no was the flirt a little offered discounts, then eventually asked for the number. Those who handed it over didn't have a problem. Those that refused got cussed out before he refused service altogether. She claimed she actually had security footage of him going off when a customer, and some of the language he used was absolutely abhorrent. She planned on giving him a final warning over the incident that she prefers to work with and mentor junior staff instead of just kicking them to the curb. But the one thing she can't deal with is liars. Not realizing the footage came with audio, Tom tries to lie his way out of the predicament by claiming the disagreement was because the lady had tried to give him a fake $10 bill. That's like a pathological level of dishonesty, right? They're still insisting on the lies when confronted with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. I just remember apologizing for the intrusion and thanked her for setting me straight before I headed over to work to clock in. Tom was still expecting a reply at that point, but I just had no idea what to say to him. I wasn't even sure if I was ever going to talk to him again. I mean, that could have been me getting cussed out if I had the gall to turn them down. When I finished my shift, I got my phone out of my purse and I find that I had a grand total of 12 butt notifications, all with Tom's name attached. They started off all gentle at first. "Have a good shift. Text me when you finish," etc. But around 8 p.m., there was obviously a point where he learned of the interaction between me and his former manager, and he was not happy about that. Not one bit. "Oh, so you're just going to believe the exploitative employer over the person she's been taking advantage of? This is exactly what's wrong with the American labor market. Even the workers are bootlickers," was the general tone of his messages. I'm not even saying I entirely disagree, but the whole thing left such a bad taste in my mouth, but I wasn't interested in seeing him at all. When I got home from work, I blocked Tom's number, deleted my contact details, and figured that would be that. But oh, how wrong I was. A few days later, I'm working the evening shift, crouched down stocking the mini fridge. I finish up, close the fridge. Then when I stand and turn around, Tom stood at the register. I tried to be as warm and friendly as possible, asking how he's been and stuff. But I completely avoid the fact that we haven't spoken since his little text tirade. At first, I think I dodged a bullet, as he's perfectly civil and goes on to order a drink. But like right as I'm handing him his drink, he decides to make it super awkward. "So I guess you're pretty much done with me, He didn't say it in that particularly aggressive way, but it was loud and jarring enough to attract the attention of almost everyone in the store. I feel like I'm about to cringe out of existence, but somehow I maintain my corporal form and say in as lower a voice as possible, "This isn't the time or place. Please drop it." He just smiles, nods, and starts walking away. But instead of actually walking out of the door like I thought it was going to, he just takes a seat right in the middle of the store and proceeds to just stare at the register area in between baby sips of this coffee. And that's basically how it started. Tom would show up for coffee almost every time I was working, and every time he would just sit there for like an hour, staring me down whenever I was at the register. He was never rude or awkward about it, not after the initial incident anyway. So despite the fact that my boss had assured me that any funny business would result in a lifetime ban, he was reluctant to kick him out for being a little weird, as he phrased it. That got to be a kind of running joke about it, to everyone calling him Bicky Stalker, and I have to admit that one about upselling the Portuguese custard tarts until he was too fat to chase me. That one really didn't make me smile, but boy did that stop being funny. After the first time, he followed me home. After that, things got serious. I called the cops, got some advice from their fixated persons unit, and they actually paid Tom a visit to warn him off stalking me. But apparently he was only deterred for about a week, and what followed was a painfully slow escalation of intensity that culminated in the following. And that the 24 times had followed me up till that point, Tom had either stayed on the street corner and watched me walk into my building, or stood outside the building and looked up at the windows like he was trying to work out exactly which unit I was in. But on the day in question, I was so used to him keeping his distance that I didn't even notice that he was almost right behind me by the time I got to my door. Seeing him so close actually elicit the kind of squeal from me I'm definitely not proud of. But Jesus Christ, seeing him right there just about scared the poop out of me. I absolutely bowled it inside. Never been so grateful that the lock was operated by a key fob instead of an actual key. Tom just stayed at the door, banging on it and telling me to get my butt out there, that I had to be an adult and talk to him about it. Whatever it was, since he was banging on the door and screaming in the street, I was totally freaking out. And naturally, my first move is to call the cops. But I think he was banging so hard, acting like I was the one inside because the building I live in at the time looked exactly like all the other family homes on the block. To him, I could have quite easily been the only person living there only. That wasn't quite the case. I had the top floor of the house. Well, the bottom floor was occupied entirely by this Puerto Rican guy who worked night shifts. Keep in mind that this whole thing is going on in a Saturday afternoon, smack bang in the middle of this guy's sleeping time. So while I'm praying for the cops to show up in time, an unlikely savior is about to come to my rescue. So imagine you're me. Oh, you can hear us, Biggie. If you think that you can just punk guys like me and I'll face the consequences, you're dumber than you look. Bang, bang, bang. The out of nowhere and even deeper, louder voice starts booming over the first like, "Hey, are you crazy? I'm trying to sleep here." My neighbor from downstairs. His name actually turned out to be Luis, is wearing nothing but a pair of shorts, and he's screaming in Tom's face as he backs down the steps of our building. Tom starts saying something back to him, but Luis keeps shouting over him, telling him to get lost. Get it doesn't like he's interested in backing down just yet. Then again, out of nowhere, I hear Luis say, "Oh, you're gonna tase me, bro," before the confrontation gets physical. Everyone else in the streets is fixated on the fistfight that's now going down, but all I can focus on is what Luis said, "Tase me." Tom and brought a taser, presumably to use on me. Now by that point, because the cops were getting called about the fight on top of my stalking complaint, a marked patrol car rolls onto the scene. With a by now bloody Tom trying to walk away from the scene, the cops initially go for Luis, drawing their guns and demanding a show of hands. Buddy responds with, "Hey, I'm the victim here. This guy just tried to tase me." The cops and I watch as Tom starts to walk faster away from the scene, which obviously prompts the cops to chase him down and arrest him for carrying a concealed weapon or whatever they had in mind. Finally, my stalker was in police custody, only wouldn't catch charges for the actual stalking. He ended up going to jail for the one thing cops could stick to him, the contents of his backpack. On the one day that Tom had decided to act on this little fixation and move in to take me, or whatever, he had come with a pre-prepared kidnap kit, along with a few other choice items. According to the detective I spoke to after the fact, Tom had chosen to confront me that day while carrying duct tape, a length of electrical cord, a kind of retractable baton, and a box of 100 different contraceptives. For some reason, is that last part that particularly creeped me out, not so much their inclusion, but the sheer freaking number of them. At his trial for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, Tom's attorney argued the state was trying to wrongfully prosecute a man who had been unfortunate enough to be assaulted by an unhinged parolee, whilst caring nothing more about malicious than home supplies. The persecution had a different story. Not only had they obtained CCTV image of Tom showing up at my job on a total of 31 separate occasions over the course of 2 months, but a search of his home had turned up some extremely disturbing discoveries. What Tom had in his backpack that day was just a fraction of the kidnap kit that it assembled. He in all kinds of handcuffs, ankle cuffs, ring gags, and latex masks. But by far the most disturbing was the surgical tools and the Civaflorin canister face mask combo. Yeah, I had to ask what Civaflorin was too. It turns out it's similar to chloroform that knocks you out, stuff that you put on a rag. He had tons of creepy stuff on his hard drive, including guides to kidnapping, hiding, and eventually breaking his prospective victims through a combination of brainwashing and beating. He also had a bunch of foreign language comic books that seemed to focus heavily on carnal torture, I suppose you could say. The prosecution just piled on all this evidence until it was quite clear to both the judge and jury that Tom was an extremely dangerous individual. I was terrified he'd escape justice via some loophole or something. Maybe he'd have rich parents who could pay for some smart lawyer. But no. Not even his clean rap sheet saved him from getting a solid 22-year sentence for conspiracy to commit kidnapping. As you can imagine, it was quite an ordeal, and I had to make a number of court appearances to confirm that I was one of the subjects of his many fixations. It was the most stressful experience of my life without a shadow of a doubt, and a part of me wonders just how many of those 22 years he'll really end up doing. And when he does get out, will he really have changed? Or am I going to be walking on my driveway one day when I feel a hand on my shoulder? My goodness, turn around and see the face of a man who wants to finish what he started.
I was one of those kids you see walking around zoos or amusement parks wearing a leash. Those were already a thing 20 plus years ago, but less common, and were initially only tied around the wrist. In my case, it was a necessity. I would always start wandering off from the rest of the family no matter what situation. This is one of the stories that led to me earning my leash. It happened when I was about 6 years old and I went to the zoo with my mom and sisters. Before every family outing, my mom made sure to give me the talk about not walking off again or face the consequences. My mom was a strict parent that made good on her promises. She had to, being a single mother of 3. I didn't try to disobey her per se, but I often just didn't pay attention to the world and people around me. No different to this day. I behaved and followed the group for a while, but then a butterfly garden caught my attention and off I was. When I finally realized I separated myself from my mom and sisters again, I panicked and started walking around the zoo looking for them, being afraid for my mom's reaction more than anything else. After a while, I somehow got it in my head that if I could just walk out, find our car, and wait there, my family would eventually find me. So I did. I got lost within a couple of minutes, walking around a strange neighborhood looking for either our car or the way back to the zoo. Nothing looked familiar. I started crying, and my mom was going to be so mad. Then, this man came up to me, just normal looking, about 40 years old, asking me if I'm lost. I explained I lost my family when we were visiting the zoo, and I'm looking for the way back. I couldn't believe my luck when the man told me he had just come from the zoo and saw a family there, standing near the entrance, who were waiting for a little girl with blonde hair and a baseball cap. But it was still a few blocks away, so he proposed I walk with him to his car, and we could drive the rest of the way back. Just the mention of his car finally made me hesitant. I told him I wasn't allowed to get in the car with strangers. My mom would be so mad. He then said something like, "That was true, but I look smart enough to know I could trust someone." Don't remember the exact words, but something along those lines. Also, he added, He spoke to my parents earlier when they were looking for me, so he's not a complete stranger. That didn't seem right. I asked him if he'd really talked to my dad, who had died a year before, and when he said he did, I broke down crying uncontrollably. I still didn't understand the situation I was in. I was just really confused about everything and scared of how angry my mom was going to be after all this. Finally, my crying caught the attention of the security guard of a parking building we were standing next to, asking if there was something he could help with. The guy stepped aside with the security guard and started explaining the situation, but made it vaguely sound like he was my father and we were looking for his wife. The security guard seemed to believe him, pointing us in the direction right towards the zoo. The man thanks the security guard and proceeds to take my hand and walk away. The security guard takes a last look at me and asks me, in a comforting, friendly, adult-to-child kind of way, why I'm still crying. I tell him that my dad is dead. He looks really confused for a second, then asks if this man is not my dad. I tell him again, no, my dad is dead. In a split second, his whole face and posture changes, and he turns to look at the guy, who's trying to explain he never actually said he was my dad, that the security guard must have misunderstood, and he was just helping me find my mom. The security guard said he appreciated the man's help, but he would take me off his hands now, and the guy immediately took off. I don't think there was much else the security guard could have done. I explained the whole situation, and after making a phone call, he walked me to the entrance of the zoo, which was just around the corner from the parking building. From there, we were brought to the security's office where my mom and sisters were already waiting. I feel extremely lucky for the security guard being at the right place at the right time that day, and very grateful for the extra second of time he took that could have made all the difference.